Hey guys, welcome to Scar Stories. Today, we continue with week 4 of my latest series, Unstoppable. Tragedy hits all of us at some point. But what happens when infertility, bankruptcy, death, and cancer all come at once? Join me today for a brutally open and honest conversation with my friend Laurie Muhn. You'd never know what she's been through with her beautiful smile and upbeat personality. A truly unstoppable woman with an unbelievable story. I know you'll be inspired. Check this out. Hey everybody, welcome to Scar Stories, and I have an amazing guest with me today. I'm so excited about this interview. Her name is Laurie Muhn, and she's actually been a friend of mine for many years. And as we continue this series called Unstoppable, she is really the epitome of unstoppable. And that's why I want to have her on this show, because not only does she have this amazing personality that I've always known her to be such an unstoppable woman in so many ways, she's actually been through quite an amazing journey that she's going to share with us today. And I can't believe some of the stuff that she's been through. And in fact, as we were preparing for this, Laurie, I was thinking this morning that it's almost like, it almost reads like a Hollywood movie that still hasn't had a written ending yet, of just, someone who's just had hit after hit of stuff, and your ability and your tenacity to go through some of the stuff. It's been so inspiring to me. And I'm so happy that we've reconnected after all these years, because I can't believe, what a blessing you are, and your amazing attitude, despite some of these things that you're dealing with and going through. So I know you guys will be so inspired. So without further ado, this is Laurie Muhn. So say hello, everybody. Say hello, Laurie. And Laurie was a wife, and she has 2 beautiful sons. She also was an occupational therapist. Well, she still is, and hopefully is going to be returning to that. It's an amazing career. So she's had a career helping people, which is amazing. But she is going to share a little bit of her story. And it all kind of starts with her meeting her husband, who I actually knew very well too, because we all grew up together. Her husband's name was Steve. And Laurie, to start off today, tell us about that. So your story begins really as, when we were young and kids, we met and became friends. And then you met the love of your life, Steve, in high school, actually. So tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about your love story with him.
So Steve and I met on a missions trip to Costa Rica, and he was a year younger than me. So I sort of pretended he was my friend for a while, because I was embarrassed that he was younger. But he was just an awesome guy. We had such a beautiful friendship, and we just really fell head over heels in love with each other. And we stayed together all through college, all 7 years of that, and got married at a young age of 22.
Wow.
And yeah, we just, we had an awesome friendship. It was just the love of my life in every way, everything I could have asked for in somebody to marry.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I always remembered Steve too. He's what a great guy, just funny and fun. Well, you guys are both, you're always such a great couple. So I was always so happy you guys were together. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, look, and so obviously you have this wonderful love story, which, the show continues. You guys, as you were building your lives together, you wanted to start a family. And this is kind of the first kind of real major life challenge that you kind of went through. So tell us a little about that. Yeah. What happened?
So I really didn't want to work, to be honest with you. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have kids. I wanted a 1950 arrangement, believe it or not. That was just who I was at the time. Sure. And we started trying to have kids very young, at like 24 or 25, and just wasn't happening. Went through 10 years of brutal infertility. We went through in vitro after in vitro, loss of pregnancies, and I felt very ripped off. I felt like people could just have a one-night stand with someone they didn't even know and come forth with this baby. And I had this person who was the love of my life I'd been with since I was 16, and I couldn't hold that love in my hands. And it made me really angry. I was very angry at God. I played by the rules. Mm-hmm. I was with someone I loved. I saved myself for that person. And then I didn't even get anything from that. And so I was pretty angry.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I can totally understand that. But then something happened. You also had the opportunity now to adopt 2 amazing boys. And so how did that come about?
So after 10 years, I don't give up easy. I mean, people are like 10 years. I went through in vitro for like 18 months and I was done. I'm like, oh no, 10. I would not take no for an answer. Right. I'm like, it's going to happen this time. It's going to happen this time. Right. So finally I put my name in for adoption, thinking I'm not going to have to do this because don't you know, you put your name in for adoption, you get pregnant. That's what happens.
Right.
And by that time, I'd really wrestled it out with God. I basically said, God, you suck. I'm not going to follow you because that's a big part of my life. And if I can get a baby another way, I'm going to get a baby any way I can get it. But I sort of wrestled through that, and we put our names in for adoption. And 3 weeks later, I had a baby.
Wow.
And yeah, I had a baby that was a newborn. He was put in my arms the minute he was born. And we actually got to stay in the hospital 3 days with him, give him his first bottle. And it was beautiful. And then 2 years later, we put our name in again. And 2 months later, we had our second boy. Wow. So our adoptions were great and simple and smooth, which not everyone's story is that in adoption. But I sort of paid my 10-year dues. And I said, a baby doesn't land in my lap, I'm going to walk because I'm so done with this painful experience.
Sure. Yeah. No, I can understand that. And how has it been? How has been being an adoptive mom? I should say, like different than maybe you think it would have been. Like, was it what you expected? Like, was it as fulfilling, or did you always kind of still feel like you wish you'd had your own kids, or do you feel? I think it's probably a weird question because I'm sure.
No, it's not weird at all. I would say, this is when I knew. My mom called me one day, like my kids were maybe 5 and 7. And she's like, Laurie, Heather's pregnant, my sister-in-law. Mm-hmm. How was your pregnancy? How did you have this same problem? I go, Mom, my kids are adopted. She had completely forgotten.
Wow. That's something totally my mom would do. That's so funny.
She's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I think the beauty in adoption is you're not expecting things from them. You're not like, oh, you're like your dad, or you're like your mom, or you're like your Uncle Mark. They just get to unfold in front of you, and they're free, and you are free from a lot of those expectations. You just watch them unfold for who they are.
Right. That's beautiful. I never really would have thought about it like that, but that's very cool.
And I've always just kind of, my kids know their story. And I just have always felt if you're an artist, it's like tertiary colors, meaning you can have, yellow and blue make green. Okay. Right. It's a mom and a dad and it makes green, but to have chartreuse or magenta, there's got to be a third element. And so I felt like we're that third element to come into my boy's life. And I feel like, they're like a brighter color as a result.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. What a great analogy. Well, I hope anyone that has gone through a difficult experience like that hears this today is encouraged, because that is a really beautiful way to look at adoption. I don't think I've heard it that way. And it's amazing too, like, even though through all of that pain and disappointment that you're still, it's like, I feel like God still had a plan, like, of these boys being in your home.
Well, it's funny because I kept going, why me? Why can't I have a baby? And the minute I held that Evan, my firstborn, in my arms, went, oh, it wasn't about me. It was about you. It was about you getting in the right home.
Right. Isn't that great? That's so great. Well, that's such a beautiful, beautiful story. And I love that. That's so great. And so because you have there's so much to your story. So I want to talk about more of it. That's amazing. And obviously, so now you've got these 2 beautiful boys, and you and Steve are building your home, and there was a lot of success. Steve, I know Steve was a builder, and then you're building your career as an occupational therapist, and God had blessed you guys. You had, a great home and some financial success and things like that. And then we had another tragedy kind of happen. What else happened to you guys? So
Steve had a lot of success very young, and he ran a very successful construction company. And he then decided to come to Chicago and, take his building show on the road. And he came here, and with a roommate from college, started a business and was buying city blocks in the city and putting up developments, and it was going really well. And we were living in a really nice area in Chicago, and 2008-9 hit. And with the building industry, it just wiped us out. So we lost everything. We always like to say we went from the Park Hyatt to the park bench, like in the matter of a year. So we literally lost everything. And we just thought it was a blip. We thought, oh, this isn't going to last. And we kept putting all our own money, pulling out all our retirement and putting it towards our employees and towards our projects, hoping that it was just going to come back around. Well, it took years for that to come back around, and we never recouped it.
Sure.
And in the meantime, we had a lot of personal losses with both his parents died within 30 days of each other. And then his business partner embezzled a couple million that we had between the two of us from the business.
Yes.
And then we had one of my husband's best friends stole 50 grand from us, all within a matter of a couple months.
Oh.
And Steve simply just lost his mind. He just went in a corner and was playing with his lip, basically.
Right.
He just really didn't handle it well.
Right.
And who would?
Right. Right.
Yep.
Wow. And that's like such a challenge too, because here you are, like you're married, you're trying to be a mom, and he's trying to be a dad, and you've got these two kids. And then, I mean, that's such a hard thing. And I think going through the Corona crisis, I know a lot of people can probably relate to what Laurie's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are struggling right now, including myself. I've gone through all these huge changes financially because it's, you can't tour. I haven't been able to do a lot of the recording sessions I do because there's no shooting. So it's been a lot of people, and it's really a hard experience to, because we wrap up so much of our identity in our jobs. And I think for men, especially, not that women don't, because we do too, but I think especially men wrap up that identity. And so when that begins to disintegrate or fall apart, it's deeper than just losing the money. It's almost like losing who you are and your identity. So that was, I know, really challenging. So that, how did that play out in your marriage and your family? So you went through kind of a hard time.
Yeah. So it all culminated in, we eventually lost our home, and, being home builders and being, I said, I liked the 1950 arrangement. So home was everything to me.
Sure.
And Steve, and I dealt with it very differently. I picked up what I believed in and my faith and what I put my strength in, and I poured myself into that. And Steve floundered, and he turned to alcohol, and just really couldn't get out of the mental health and medicating himself that way. And I had to figure out how to support my children. So Steve was in and out of rehabs. He'd be in rehab and out of rehab. And I had no way of supporting my family because I'm an OT, but I didn't have a license in Illinois. And I had said, I'm never going to work again. When I adopted my kids, I'm never going to work again. And I didn't have to financially. And so I had no way of returning. And I ended up someone saw I had a flair with gardens, and I started a gardening business. And it was humiliating. I was digging people's yards, and I was, working really hard, manual labor to keep hot dogs on the table, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow. And then it didn't stop there, unfortunately. So you guys, I know, I love it. The story is so amazing. So after this happens, Steve's really not getting any better. And you guys are, probably, I'm sure, still trying to you were still figuring out what to do. And then tragedy struck again. And what happened?
Well, in the other tragedy, to go back, the cycle was Steve would get it together, get a job, hold it together for maybe a year at best, 6 months at best, lose the job, and we'd spiral all over again. Mm. And in that, he had ended up getting so many DUIs, he ended up being on house arrest for a year.
Oh, wow.
And that was really, really trying in many ways. And I know I've heard so many women during Corona, or couples saying, or just at each other, we're under each other's feet. It's such a transition. And I went through that during that house arrest. It is very difficult. So I really felt for people during that.
Sure.
So after we lost our house, we sort of moved around, and Steve, within a matter of those 3 years, I guess it was 4 years, he had been in and out of 9 rehabs and just could never get it together. And the last rehab, he came out, and he just was so burdened to take care of his family. That was the most important thing to him, was to take care of the family and provide. And he got an amazing job, kind of to his skill set. And he started working, and everything looked really good. And I got a call, and they said, there was a state trooper on the phone, and he said, something's happened, and we need you to come down to such and such a hospital in the city, and we'll fill you in. So I went down to the hospital, and they weren't telling me what was happening. It took a very long time to get to the bottom line. And I found out that Steve had died. And he had a heart attack, and he died coming from his office on a path to get on the train to come home that evening.
Wow. Which do they think was just, do they know what caused it, or?
So it was definitely a response from substance. And it just took a toll on him. His heart just couldn't keep up with what he was doing to keep himself afloat.
Right.
And he died. And it was not how I thought the ending was going to be with him. I thought for sure he now had everything he said he was drinking over in place.
Right. Right.
And he's, and this is how it ended. And it wasn't the ending that I had pictured.
Sure. And that's got to be so challenging, because you think, well, what did I do wrong? Like, how did we, I think that's what's hard about substance abuse, which a lot of you who watch Scar Stories, we just finished a series on addiction. And we talked so much about, it's such an evil disease because it's so insidious, and it resurfaces, and it just takes people, it's one of the things that one of the women I had on that talked about, the families and stuff of, that deal with alcoholism and things like that. It's just the toll that it takes, and the stress and everything else is so enormous, and what it puts everybody through. And in addition to the person that's actually suffering and struggling with this addiction. And I can't imagine, like how hard that was for you, and which we've talked about. I know, like, talk a little bit about that. It created so much stress for you, obviously, having to deal with all of that. And then now losing him on top of all of it, that had to have been just, what was your next step after that?
Well, as far as the struggle, I just always had hope he'd get better. I really believed that if I worked hard enough and supported him, and I tried loving him, I tried putting boundaries down, I tried tough love, I tried everything. And that's it with addiction, right? Is love isn't enough.
No, it's not. No.
And it doesn't matter. And he'd say, I love you. And I'd say, I love you. And then I'd say, but it's not enough.
Right. Right. It's a deeper issue that you can't really, So how did you, Laurie, dealing with all this, obviously I can't even still imagine, because especially I love you as my friend, and it's like having to navigate that. How did you get through that? How did you get through having to lose him? And you can't fall apart because you've got these two boys. So it's like that creates a whole other struggle, because you're like, okay, I've got to still kind of keep it together somehow, because I got these kids and they're relying on me, and they're obviously mourning the loss of their dad. So take us through what kind of your life was like after that?
I think the tone was set the night of Steve's death. I had to come home and tell my kids. Hardest thing I've ever had to do is look into those little faces. They adored their dad. Steve was fun. He was Susan can attest, he was the funnest guy. He just lit up a room. And when I had to tell my kids, my youngest one, he cried. And then he said, I have to go to the garage. I said, okay. He goes, you can come with me. All right, let's go to the garage. Went to the garage. He took out his baseball bag. He took out his glove. He put in his dad's glove, and he had a big tournament the next day. His team had been the underdogs, and they had somehow gotten into this championship. And he pulled out Steve's glove and he said, I'm playing with Dad's glove, and I'm playing tomorrow. And I just thought it was so brave. I thought anybody would have understood if we called and said, we're not coming to the game, something's happened. And he's like, nope, Dad would want me to play, and he'd want me to play my best, and he'd be proud. And that set our tone.
Wow, that's awesome.
How we moved forward.
Sure. And that says so much for your kids, and what a great mom you are, Laurie. The fact they would even have that kind of insight, and it's and how inspiring that they're choosing to be brave. Isn't it amazing how kids can you pour into the kids, and then at some point they sort of bless you back.
Yeah.
Which is so cool. So, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I had to, it set the tone to just sort of carry on. Like, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to make sure my kids are cared for. And by that time, we were pretty financially wiped out. So I was living pretty thin, and I was really counting on Steve's new job to get us through the thinness we had already come through.
Sure.
And a couple months after Steve's death, I lost my job. My company got bought out.
Okay.
And they were supposed to rehire us all. It was going to be no big deal. And they didn't. Mm-hmm. So I was scrambling to get a job. And that happened a couple months into it. So, that was the first bump. And then I was working 3 or 4 jobs to keep my kids afloat. I was doing contract, I was doing OT, I was gardening still, I was doing everything I could just to keep everything intact, because if my kids could just keep going to school and being in the home they were in, I felt it was stability.
Right.
So it was very stressful. Mm-hmm. And January 2020 came, and my insurance had finally kicked in for my job, and I was going to be able, this was the year of mammograms and colonoscopies and taking care of my health and taking care of me. And so January 3rd, I had my colonoscopy all set up, and I went in and didn't even think twice about it. It was no big deal. And the guy who did my colonoscopy woke me up and he said, "Are you awake from my anesthesia?" And I said, "Sure. Yeah, what you got?" He said,
"Kind of."
He goes, "Well, you have a pretty sizable tumor in your colon." I said, "I didn't say I was that awake." I'm like, "I'm not that awake, dude.
Give me a few more minutes."
Right.
Not ready.
I think I misunderstood you. So he said, it's for sure cancer. I've done this enough. He says, "You're going to have to, get it diagnosed for sure, but I can tell you it's cancer." So, that's never fun to hear.
No, I would say.
So as I went through more of the diagnostic process of it, it was, it's stage 1, it's no big deal. Colon cancer is, it's cancer in a Ziploc bag, because they basically cut it out, boom, you're back on your feet. So I was like, all right, no big deal. Way to go. Good one to pick.
Right, exactly.
And then as I moved through all the diagnostics, it went from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, and it ended up at stage 4, and they called it stage 4 terminal cancer.
Wow.
So, and then the pandemic hit. So I had my surgery, and 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit. So nobody could come in and help me. All my friends were afraid to be around me because I'm compromised. School shut down. So I now have 2 boys at home eating constantly. And it was something. And I didn't have a husband.
Right.
So to care for me.
Right.
So it was a really interesting balance. And I didn't tell my kids my cancer was that bad. I just told them I had cancer and we're going to get through this. And
sure.
Yeah. So it was tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say. Well, one thing about, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, besides hearing this amazing story, which again, just reads like a Hollywood movie, I have to say, only it's real. Because you think, how could all this happen to one person? Your strength and attitude, though, are just incredible. And they've been such a blessing to me. And I think, Laurie, most people would just probably curl up in the corner at this point. And, I just want to start talking to you today about, what the source of your strength has been. Like, how have you been able to get through this? And here you are, and you look beautiful, and you're glowing, and you have energy, and you are so positive. Like, what's your secret? Because I think we would all, if you had that in a bottle, we'd all buy it. After, all you've been through today.
Denial, straight out denial.
Exactly. Besides your amazing personality. That's fun.
100% my strength is my faith in God.
Yeah.
And you would think I would raise my fist and say, this is unfair. And this, why me? Mm-hmm. Because I feel like I've faithfully put God in my life. So to others, it does look very unfair.
Mm-hmm.
But I just have found God so faithful in it. The storms have come and hit, but in it, there's been such provision and such goodness. And I've been able to see the face of God in a way I never would. I've been able to see the face of other people's beauty in a way I never would. I've always been very self-sufficient, and all these circumstances have made me reliant for people financially. I had to go on food stamps. I had to go on public assistance to support my kids at one point. I've had to reach out to people to help me with childcare. I always thought I'd be a stay-at-home mom. I had to farm my kids out. I had to rely on other people to help heal my husband in his alcoholism. It's just everything in my strength was ripped away, and I had to just say, where does my strength come from?
Right.
And rely on it.
Right. That's awesome.
And I would say that when I was a kid, I lived in Ohio for a bit. And in Ohio, it's very flat, and you could see the tornadoes coming. Mm-hmm. And there was a really big tornado once. It's actually in like history because it's one of the biggest tornadoes in the Midwest. Yeah. And my mother was just so irritated at us, and she didn't know this tornado was going on in the city over. So she kept saying, "Oh, go outside and play." And we were watching this tornado coming, and like a picture frame would come in our front yard, and we take it into my mom, and she'd say, "Oh, that's great. Where'd you get that?" We're like, "It came out of the sky." She's like, "Go outside and play."
Oh, that's so funny.
And it's sort of been my attitude in life is I would see the tornado coming and it would make me afraid. I'd go outside and play. And what I didn't know is that you can't outrun a tornado. Right. And what you really need to do is take shelter in that storm. Mm-hmm. And I've had to learn that through some hard things. I think other people would have a little less tenacity or fearlessness in it. And I could have stand it a bit more, to be honest with you. Wow. And I think that's what my cancer brought me is I was leveled. My chemo was so extreme. I couldn't get out of bed. I slept really like 14 days. And then I'd have 2 days where I could stand and get up and maybe do a couple things. And I was reliant for people bringing me food. I was reliant on people bringing me, doing my laundry. I was reliant on everything. But goodness sakes, my kids had to pick me up and take me to the bathroom. And I was reliant. Right. And that's what cancer taught me is that the world will keep spinning.
Right.
Even if I'm not working 6 jobs and trying to fix everything.
Right. And you have to almost learn how to let people help you, which is, I know I struggle with that myself. And it's just, that's a hard thing to do, to let go, because especially when we are motivated, and I know you and I joke that we're both like type A personalities, and it's like wanting to always control and you've got goals, your things you're trying to do, and you try to make the most of things, even when things are hard, but you still have that element of control though. Even if things are hard, it's like, okay, well then we're just going to conquer this like I conquer everything else. And there's a point where, like what you're sharing, there's a point where there's only so much you can do. And sometimes the way through something isn't going to be your strength. It's going to be God, and it's going to be other people coming around you that are going to kind of carry you through it, so, which is a hard lesson, but it's amazing that you kind of already spoke to this, but I want to bring up this point too, because I know both of us grew up in such a, very conservative kind of church environment, and, which is good and bad. There's great things that we learn from that. And it's always great to learn. I'm very grateful for my upbringing. I know you are too. But as we go through life, there's kind of this practicality and kind of this get real. I call it like a get real period that I think we all have to go through. That's kind of like, okay, like just because you were taught something, or maybe I know a lot of our listeners, it's the same thing that, maybe you heard about God when you were a kid, and maybe you went to, Catholic school or private school, like Laurie and I did. But at some point you have to sort of decide, like, if you believe it because your parents do, or because we don't really get to adopt each other's faith. We have to sort of decide on our own if we're going to do that or not, if we're going to really develop that relationship with God ourselves. And how do you think going through some of these things has really changed your relationship with God from when you were like a kid and like talking to you now, like, because I'm sure it's changed enormously, I'm sure.
like Susan said, we grew up in homes that really pointed us to God and God loving. And everything was pretty easy for me. I had great parents. I went to a great high school. I didn't really have a lot of bumps in the road. As you heard, I met my husband young. We fell in love. We got married. So my first bump was that infertility. And now you've heard all my bumps since. Yeah. I always laugh because I was a hurdler in high school. I hurdled in track, and that's all I've been doing ever since is jumping over freaking hurdles, right?
Oh man, that's a good
idea. So I think my faith turned from, oh, look, I've been living this great life and God's blessing me, and look how good I am. And here's the proof is how easy my life is. And isn't that how it's supposed to go? What you reap, you sow, and karma. And when life started turning into all this brokenness and broken pieces, I had to decide whether God was worth following still. And that's hard because he looked pretty mean and pretty unfair.
Sure.
And all I can say is he just kept showing himself real through it. And he kept walking with me through it and providing for me in miraculous ways through it. And I was going to probably go through all this anyways. At least I had a God who loved me and cared. And there's a verse in the Bible that I always held on to, and it says that he collects all our tears in a bottle. And that just really comforted me to know all this pain and all this brokenness, that God cares so much that he's collecting my tears in a bottle, and not one goes past him where he doesn't enter in and step in and provide. And he just provided in such large ways, I can't describe it. One example, which, I have so many of these, I can't even begin to tell you, but I was on a sledding hill one night with my kids, and Steve was at his first rehab. And our family tradition was every time it snowed for the first time, we ran out to the snow hill down the street and we went sledding, no matter what time of day, if school was the next day, whatever. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep the tradition alive. I'm not going to let all this hardship change how we live and who we are and who I am and how we want to raise our children. Mm. So we ran out to the snow hill and the kids, and I literally had nothing in the house, and I didn't have any money, and I didn't know how I was even going to have food for the next week. And the kids were like, Mama, can we have hot chocolate and marshmallows? And I was like, yeah. And I'm in my head thinking, I don't have hot chocolate. I don't have marshmallows. I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. But I couldn't deny them. And so I started wrestling with God, and I said, God, I don't know what I'm going to do, but these poor little kids want hot chocolate and marshmallows. And I don't want to tell them I can't afford it. And I don't want to tell them I don't have it. And I just kept praying they'd forget about it. And the more I prayed, the louder they got and the more persistent they got. And the whole way home, they were chanting marshmallows, hot chocolate. And we walked in the door, and I'm not kidding you, there were 3 grocery bags sitting there. Somebody had dropped them off, a friend of mine. I didn't know she was doing it. And on top was hot chocolate and marshmallows.
Wow.
And I called her the next day and said, how did you know? She says, I don't know. I just felt like I was supposed to give you something fun, and it sounded like fun to me. But wow. God knew, and God knew that my kids were going to be asking that. And I have so many examples of that. So how can I turn from that kind of beautiful provision and love?
Right. That's awesome. And I think that's always the challenge as we go through these things that we don't understand them in the immediate, like why they're being allowed, but yet there's like this purpose in it that's bigger than we are. Yeah. And do you feel like you're seeing anything like that, like with what's happening with you?
Well, I was laughing about, cancer because I was like praying and wishing and hoping for years I could have a rest where I didn't have to work. Where I could just chill out all day in the sun.
Yeah, right.
Where I could be home with my kids.
Right.
Watch
like this. Not what you had in mind.
Right. So when I got it, I was like, okay, seriously, I think we crossed wires here. I'm at a beach.
It's not what I was saying. Let's go back. Oh man.
the story of life, right? Like we're wanting something and it's really like I needed a rest. I really did. And I would have given it to me in such a different way. But this is the way it came to me. Right. And this is the way, and I'm not kidding you. I sometimes now, so my last chemo was October 2020. Okay. So I've had some time to heal. And there's days where I literally say, oh, I want chemo back.
Oh my goodness.
But I say, I want chemo without chemo. I want the day where I can just give myself the grace to do nothing and no expectations and nobody's expecting anything of me. And really, we can all do that for ourselves. We just forget we can. Right. I mean, chemo without chemo.
There you go. I like it. I know, because I'm hoping you won't have to have that again. So, oh man, that's funny though. I know. Well, rest is obviously super important and it's hard. And I think that's what's hard. We go through all these things too, and it creates so much stress for ourselves, which I know we touched on yesterday in our call. Like, it's so hard it really speaks to that, how, in our faith journey, there's this opportunity to rest in God. And I think that idea is really foreign to a lot of people. Like, I think when it gets down to us, all of us, we want peace more than anything, and I think that's one of the things I've learned in my own journey is that, like, you hear over and over in scripture, it talks about like peace, that God will give us his peace. And I think that's such an amazing thing to grab onto when we're struggling and we're going through, horrible circumstances, because finding that somehow he's still there in it and that there is a purpose. And like you said, he has all our tears and he's going to lead us through. It's like peace becomes very precious. And I know you're kind of speaking to this, that because you told me yesterday that you feel peaceful.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome. Nothing's changed, right? Like all my problems still are here. Mm-hmm. But I just feel I feel free. Like freedom is such an amazing feeling. And with that comes peace, right? I mean, if a country's at war, they don't have peace. That goes without saying. So anytime you're not feeling free, you're not feeling peace. Right. And I just think it's something that can be given to you even in the middle of it all. There doesn't have to be resolution of your situation. You can have contentment and resolution in your heart.
Right. And that's something we talked about. I know that you said, so many times people are used to this, they have this, dramatic story. And then there's like this, but then, the fairy tale ending, she won the lotto and restored to perfect health and met this super hot guy. Right. Like, that'll be next month's star story.
Well, wait a minute. That's not going to happen.
I'm praying for it, Laurie, because if anyone deserves it, you do. But talk about that a little for a minute, because you were saying how, sometimes you don't get, despite the happy ending, sometimes you just, and it's kind of what you're saying, like you can experience that in the middle of it.
Sure. Right. I think we all want to say our pain was for this. Like I went through it, but I got this, right? Something tangible or something that sounds like something other people would want.
Right.
And I know that God doesn't ever waste pain, but he doesn't ever use it how we picture, I don't think. Right. So it requires a lot of flexibility in your life and grace. Like we have to be graceful towards ourselves. We have to be graceful towards others, towards our circumstances. And even it sounds odd to have grace towards God, but you have to have this all knowing that he knows more than you. He has a plan for your life, and you can trust it even when it looks crazy and looks unfair.
Right.
And so even though I don't have all clear with my cancer diagnosis. My husband isn't living. I don't have my house. I don't have financial stability. I don't have any of these things resolved. But what I have resolved is the peace that I have a God who has a plan for me and a God who loves me and gives me the provision in the day, I guess.
Right.
And it's like when you get too far ahead of yourself or you look too far behind, that old cliche, but it's so true.
Right.
And that's
very true. Yeah, it's kind of like that manna principle and that story in the Old Testament of like he only let the Israelites gather what they needed for that day, and I think that's kind of the picture is like not to get too far ahead, because truly anything could happen, and in a good way too, and that's where it's like, it really pays to not, to be able to trust. But that is such a hard thing to do. Easy to say, hard to do. And I love that you have demonstrated that so much. It's so inspiring, Laurie. So I appreciate you sharing all this with us today, because it's just amazing to hear your attitude, and what an encouragement. And I hope anyone who's hearing this today because I mean, look, we all have some kind of tragedy that we either have gone through or maybe that we will go through. And to really understand how to face difficulty well, I think is probably one of the highest challenges of life, because it's easy to act correctly and be loving and be grateful when everything's going great. When it's challenging is when, dreams don't come true or things come crashing down. And I think that's amazing that you're able to find that, so very cool. And one thing I'd like to ask you, just sort of in closing today, is what would you say to someone that's going through something really tragic right now, and they are really struggling, having a hard time finding, what the purpose is, and maybe they're even feeling a lot of anger at God, maybe anger at certain people that have let them down, which I think is totally normal. And I love your transparency, because I think it's a normal reaction, no matter how much you maybe have faith. That doesn't mean you're not always going to question sometimes, or, feel anger. What would you say? Like, how did you process some of that? And what would your advice be today for that, someone that's feeling that?
Well, I think all the cliches out there are really, I like to debunk them, right? Like, people say, God won't give you what you can't handle. Oh, gosh. Really? I think he a lot of times gives you what you can't handle because he can handle it, because he wants you to handle it. And I think he doesn't want you to handle it. He wants to handle it. And what I'd say is, it's okay to feel. It's like when you touch a hot stove, the reaction is it's hot and it burns. When something first happens that's a tragedy, it's important to recognize how you're feeling and feel it. Right. But if you stay there, that's the problem. So, and it's what you do with that, right? You've got to take that hurt and that pain, you got to process it, and you've got to share it with others. Sharing your pain. If you hide your pain, it grows. It'll grow in the dark. You've got to bring it out into the light, and you've got to allow other people to feed into you and you feed into them. And my mom always says, when you're going through something hard, find somebody else going through something similar and give to them, because then it takes the eyes off of you. Right. So I think if you can keep your eyes on God and keep your eyes on others, it really spares you from becoming a victim in your own circumstances.
Sure.
And, if you don't have a relationship with God, I think relationships are of all kind, right? Like, if you're angry with them, that's a relationship. Right. Just be angry and be honest. Right. And like I said, just keep your focus not on you, because if you stay inside, it just stays inside. Right.
That's really good advice. I love that. And that's so true. And I think that's the true of surviving it, and really making a difference, because we're so tempted to take the bait of self-pity, and to be like, and to just live there, and to isolate. And I think that's a typical reaction when we go through pain, is to isolate. So, and that's so true. I found that true in my own life, and you inspire me to also to keep that on, to keep doing that, because it's, that's so important. What great words. So, Laurie, thank you so much. This was amazing. We have to have you back on, because you have so much to share. And I love, again, that you could join us today, because I know you've got a lot going on and just trying to navigate your next steps with everything. And our prayers are so with you that some good things are going to start happening, and either way, I know you're in God's hands. I know you have faith, but how inspiring, though, that you could be with us and share such great wisdom. So thank you so much. You are truly the definition of my little series, Unstoppable. So
awesome. Thanks, Susan.
You're welcome. So hopefully we will see you again.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You're my favorite sky. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Scar Stories. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button. We'd also love it if you would leave a review. To make a one-time donation to Scar Stories, you can click on the link in the show notes, or join the Scar Stories community on Patreon. You'll get behind-the-scenes content, weekly inspiration, private Q&As with one of my awesome guests, plus a chance to submit your questions each month for the final week of each series. Life can hit you hard, and it's easy to quit. Whatever your scar story, it matters. You got this.